I had waited like 12 days trying to figure out what to do. I didn't want to turn my brother in. I felt guilty about the people dying. I was utterly confused. I didn't know what to think or do.
Welcome back, listeners. And Hamilton resident Glenn Edward Rogers is top of the news for all the wrong reasons.
Glenn Edward Rogers, he's wanted by Los Angeles, California for a homicide. He's wanted in Jackson, Mississippi in connection with a homicide. He's wanted in Bossier City, Louisiana for another homicide.
He's left a trail of mutilated victims.
Come on, let's go!
Authorities warn that Rogers is armed and very dangerous.
I came to the realization I wasn't turning in my brother. I was turning in a serial killer. My brother hadn't lived there for a long time. In 1995, my brother Glenn Rogers was arrested in Kentucky, wanted for killing women across the country. Could it be my brother was really the worst serial killer America has ever seen?
How many people have you killed, Mr. Rogers? Huh? How many people?
Glenn Rogers is my brother. He said they haven't even scratched the surface. He said 70. He had murdered 70 women.
Did you do this, Glenn? Did you kill those women, Glenn?
One-on-one alone. At the jail, you interview me.
Did you kill the women?
And could it be my brother was the real killer behind America's most sensational crime?
Detectives from the Los Angeles Police Department sought and obtained a warrant for the arrest of O.J. Simpson, charging him with the murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Lyle Goldman.
So are you a suspect on it? O.J., are you a suspect?
Now, Glenn told me when he called, she guess who I'm partying with, Nicole Simpson. Actually, what he told me, he says, they got money, they're well off, and I'm taking her down. My brother is killing dozens of people, and I'm the only one who knows it. If I don't say something, I am just as responsible. If Glenn ever gets an opportunity to watch this, I'd like to know I really did love him. I don't want... I don't know what else I could have done.
When I see Glenn as a baby, I just wonder what went wrong, what happened to him. You know, he's just a little innocent child to grow up to be a monster, so they say, and kill people. I don't know what happened.
How many people did you kill?
I think you either go one way or you go the other. You get filled with love or you get filled with hate and anger. It's what you get filled with first. If you're cared for and loved and encouraged, then you're going to turn out a good person. If you're beaten, tortured, starved, and deprived, you're going to turn out like an animal.
My name is Sue Rogers, and I'm the oldest child, and Glenn Rogers is my brother. My mother's name is Edna Mae. She was always into church, a full gospel Pentecostal, and they used to sing on the radio. And she was brought up real strict. You know, she couldn't wear pants or shorts. She had to wear skirts real long and no makeup. And they went to church like 3 or 4 times a week. My father had just got out of the military. Oh, my mom said he was the most gorgeous man she'd ever laid her eyes on. She wondered why he would pick her, because he could have anybody he wanted. But she was beautiful, too.
Well, my name's Clay Rogers. I'm the exact middle child. There's 3 older and there's 3 younger. Claude Rogers was my dad, born in Lee County, Kentucky. And the big thing down there was moonshine. Because my grandma and mom wouldn't let them bring any alcohol down there. They had bottles stored all over the property.
My dad, Claude, was a hard-drinking, moonshine-making, gun-playing man. This is where they used to keep the still where they made the moonshine at. And when my dad married my mom at a very young age, she was a church-going woman. But how he decided right then and there when they met that she wouldn't be going to church anymore.
I love my mom and dad. They did the best they could do. They're not perfect. Back then, you had to go to a judge and to get permission to have your tubes tied so you don't have any more children. And Mom and Dad went in front of a judge to ask him that, and they already had 5 kids. And he said, no, your life's not in danger. So the next child born was Glenn. It's kind of ironic, isn't it? At Glenn's birth, I think it was the worst possible time. Dad lost his job due to his drinking, so we had to move, and that was the only house that would rent to somebody with 7 kids. And Mom had to tell him we only had 4. It's the only house we could afford.
I can remember eating oatmeal, government oatmeal, for 3 years, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You're hungry, you steal something at somebody's house. The police didn't, when we got there and got in trouble, they took us to a nice place and gave us soda pop and potato chips and took us to a safe place to sleep, and there was no deterrent. Nobody was hurting you. You got hurt when you went home.
It wasn't a normal childhood, Dad liked to shoot a gun and target practice. Shooting our house up and putting it to my mom's head just was scary.
The police didn't scare us, so we weren't worried about committing any kind of crimes, and it kind of escalated from there because we got so good at sneaking in and out to get food that it was a natural escalation to become a burglar or a thief because you got so sneaky and so quiet and so discreet about it, and you were so young, nobody even paid any attention to you. You could take and do whatever you wanted.
I was about 11 years old, and Glenn was about 8, when I took him on one of his first burglaries. The blue house on the corner is very important because it's the first time in my life where I made a conscious decision to commit a crime, and I took my brother Glenn with me. We ended up almost being caught and jumped off the roof. We got away at that time. Within a couple of days later, me and Glenn were in the park. Glenn hollered at me and says, "I'll be right back." Didn't know what he was doing, but he went right into that house with a lady in the yard hanging up laundry. Went in and took her money, came back out the front door and over to the park to me. That's the first time that I realized that he was willing to go to much more extreme than I was.
Clay was using him, breaking into places and using Glenn to go in. He was smaller, plus if he got caught, he was a juvenile, and he wouldn't go to prison or jail.
He did what I told him to do when we were going through this stage, okay? He was younger, so I was kind of protecting him, and he would share bad things with me, so there was a bond there. What I've been doing is going through the microfiche at the libraries and looking up old stories about us, like this 100 burglaries in 90 days that we were arrested for back in 1973, 74, and 75. The judge branded me the ringleader, so I got sent to reform school. Then I got shipped off to the Army when I turned 17.
Glenn spent his teens going in and out of Ohio's juvenile prison system.
Glenn was sentenced to TICO, which was a reform school for juvenile offenders. And while he was out there, a couple of the guards, I've seen evidence of it, were sexually molesting him while he was there. I even seen one of the notes that the guard had sent back with his mail to his cell. Get back to your cell, get it up, I'll be there in a minute. Nobody cares for you on the outside. Nobody cares about you on the inside. You know, you're going through hell. So when you get out of that situation, I went up and got him. Hey, do you think he's can be a normal person by then? This is a sad state of affairs.
Glenn just got out of reform school, and one of his friends told him that a girl that he used to see and like was in the hospital, that she'd had a baby, and that they won't let her out of the hospital because she has no address or nowhere to go with the baby. So Glenn went up there, and next thing I know, he come to the door with Debbie and a little baby. He loved Debbie. He loved the baby. It wasn't his. He adopted it legally.
Glenn always wanted to be a good person, and he wanted to have good things, and he wanted somebody to say, look at what I've done. Look at how I've turned out. But everything that he touched turned bad.
He was very jealous. He didn't trust Debbie at all. She didn't do anything, but he just didn't trust women.
Glenn married Debbie in 1980, and they soon had a second baby of their own. But their marriage was no bed of roses. She had to be at the house, taking care of the kids, not at the store. If she variated in any way from whatever plan that was that day, then she would get beaten.
Well, he beat Debbie and put her in a hospital. So that was the first that I ever heard he was violent with the women.
Well, look, he's seen it in his own home, and the mother stayed there for over 50 years. So how else is he supposed to take it? I guess you got to beat him to keep him to stick around 50 years. After Glenn had beat Debbie so bad that it looked like he was going to be arrested, Glenn took off to California. Debbie ended up with the kids and a divorce. Glenn stayed in Los Angeles, still wanting to make a family of his own.
He met another girl, her name's Kathy, and they had one child, a boy. But that marriage didn't work out either.
A lot of people split up. A lot of people get divorces and have kids. But if you take a certain kind of person that this is their life and it means everything to them, everything, their being, their reason for getting up in the morning, and you just take it from them. You know what I mean? Of course, not only are you going to be angry, nowhere to turn, but eventually you're backed into a corner and an act of violence come out. After Glenn split from Kathy in 1984, our dad Claude got sick and died. Glenn started to unravel even more. He was doing drugs, getting arrested a lot, and traveling across the country when he wasn't in jail. And when he came back home to Hamlin, he'd be more violent, taking more risks and more chances. This is a sketch of an armed robber that robbed a gas station down the street from my sister's house with a steak knife, a butcher knife. Well, it was, my sister showed me the same newspaper article. She was going to lose her home or be evicted, and Glenn went out and robbed this gas station store and brought her the money back to save the house. The significance of him taking a weapon is he was not leaving without the money. If that person did not cooperate with him at that time, Glenn would have probably killed him.
This other article is from the first time that Glenn had got in trouble, and the police offered him a way out. It was 21 people were indicted on drug charges in one night, and all charges were dropped on Glenn, which taught him that he could get away with doing anything he wanted as long as he cooperated with the police on the other side.
I've got to know him pretty well. The people in my unit knew him pretty well. Glenn was a really smooth talker. He was a likable guy. He was a drug user himself, so a lot of people had sold to him in the past. Glenn was the one that approached the narcotic unit wanting to be able to work undercover. Glenn worked with a lot of different agencies, and I think a lot of law enforcement agencies may have provided some little training there that helped him kind of get out of some of the problems that he was in that maybe had he not seen all that, he would have not known how to do it.
Glenn was using the police as much as they were using him. No matter what you're doing out there in the street, no matter what kind of dirt you're doing, if every time the law picks you up, they let you go in order to work for them, you start to thinking you can get away with anything, even murder.
Glenn played both sides of the law for 10 years. The cops never had a clue about the demons dwelling inside my brother. When me and Glenn were young, I'd gotten hold of a deck of tarot cards, and we played with them a great deal. One night in Wayne Park up the street from here, the cards kept telling a bad story. The Tower of Destruction over and over again, the death card, terrible things that were going to happen to her. Both was very young.
We'd grown up superstitious kids. We'd never gone to church, but the old-time religion we'd come from found us anyway. One time, Glenn and I got taken to the ceremony of the Sin Eaters, where we saw a man eat food off a dead body to rid the deceased of their sins. We got to know about serpents, about Satan, demons. But Glenn and I didn't grow up praying, we grew up robbing.
Maybe it ain't so surprising that when the chance came our way in our 20s, we were tempted to call up a demon for ourselves.
We'd had a couple beers, so we start chanting. It was like it uncontrolled, like it kept coming faster, faster, and faster. It's like you can't shut up, right? And then all at once you felt it was like claws, insect tentacle claws that clawed in your mouth, down your throat, and inside you, and you could feel it. And all of a sudden it just stopped. I asked him about, did you feel that crawling in your throat? Glenn told me that he wasn't worried about the demon that came in because he figured the one that was already there would take care of it. Calling up that demon gave me my first clue that Glenn really did believe something evil lived inside him. We both did. Looking back, it was a sign that Glenn had bad mental problems and no one was giving him help. The danger signs were there in 1992 when Glenn was back in Hamilton and living with a new girlfriend. I had just done 6 months in jail. Glenn had picked me up from the Greyhound bus station in Cincinnati after I'd gotten out. He drove me to a trailer where he was staying with a cockatiel girl that had all these birds. And he talked terrible about this woman. She's actually sleeping in the bedroom in the front. And I'm in the living room looking at the birds, drinking a few beers. And Glenn's talking, she's so disgusted, I can't stand this. I said, well, let's just go. So then Glenn says, no. And he walks into the kitchen, and when he came back out, he had a knife the size of this in his hand. He looked right at me, and he told me, I'm going to stick her. I'd just done 6 months in jail. Okay, I had no intentions of going back for any reason.
And when I saw him come out with that, I knew Glenn was on the edge right then. You could tell on his face, I know him. When he came out with that, I told him no. He said, no, I'm going to stick her. I'm going to kill her. I said, no, we're out of here. On the way, he said, I should have went ahead and killed her. I might as well have got her. I've done about 50 so far. I mean, that sounds really bad right now, but I actually laughed because I didn't blame him like right. I thought he was just spouting off, throwing a temper tantrum. And I figured it'd be better to get on the road. As long as you're moving and something to do, you know, you're not thinking about the things that are bothering you so much. So I got him, took a road trip, and we got busy. Glenn and I, we're hustlers and con men on these road trips, and we did many different things. Hustling the bars at night. And we were doing burglaries during the day between 10 and 2. Glenn didn't worry about getting caught. He said, I'll just stick them. And I said, no, we don't stick. We don't hurt nobody. You don't have to hurt somebody to make some money.
That winter, we headed south, crossing one state line after another. We had to jump on the law, and we were making crime pay. All that trip, I'd heard Glenn mouth off about killing. Then I saw blood. I was at a motel in Valdosta, Georgia. Me and my brother Glenn was staying there. He had left the night before after I'd gotten drunk and passed out. He come in and woke me up about 6:30 in the morning, maybe even earlier. It was still dark. He was covered in blood, clothes all torn up. Things were all over the motel room, stolen tools, jewelry, everything. I told him to get in the bathroom, get them clothes off, and get cleaned up, that we had to get out of there.
The less willing I was to cross the line in violence, the more he adamantly wanted to cross the line. It was like he knew I didn't want to do it, like I was afraid to do it. And he wanted to show me, look, I can do that.
When Glenn got back after that road trip, he was more violent and totally out of control. I split from Glenn, got a day job, and tried to go straight. When I worked at a donut shop in Covington, Kentucky, one evening late at night, Glenn came to my house, driving the car, yelling up the window for me to come down, because he said he had someone for me to meet. When I got down to the car, he opened the trunk, and there was a body of a dead woman in the trunk. Of course, he kind of freaked me out a lot. I told him to get that thing out of here.
That's not the first time or the second time that he had done that. He's come to my house and told me that he's had a body in the trunk. I got one in a duffel bag. Help me get rid of this thing. It's too heavy. You don't pay no attention. You don't go with him. But after the first time that I'd seen one, I sure don't go with him. And then you're caught in a dilemma. Do I call the police? Do you call your mom? Who do you call? At the end of 1993, me and my brother Glenn had been cutting tobacco in Kentucky when I got into a fight and went to jail for a couple of months. When I got out, I headed for the hills to our old family farm.
I went to the cabin up here to stay for a few days, and I noticed that all the furniture in the cabin had been thrown into the back room. And I walked to the back room over here, and I started pulling things out, to get some cushions together and some place to sit, because I planned on staying a few days. Well, I reached down to grab this blue blanket and pull it out of the way, and as I did so, an arm came out of the side of it. It shocked me to death. I wasn't sure who it was or how it got there. All I know is I wasn't going to be the last person to leave this cabin with a dead person in the back room. And as I was leaving, on this wall written here was a message that said, "The shit is going to hit the fan. Get out of here." I knew it was Glenn that had left the message because he had signed it with my dad's shot glass, and only he would have done that.
After I'd found the body, I'd waited like 12 days trying to figure out what to do. I didn't want to turn my brother in. I even indulged in the idea of going down there and moving the body myself and disposing of it. Glenn was my partner in crime for many, many years, and he was the closest person in my family that there ever was. I was in turmoil. No matter what he'd done, he was still my brother. I soon found out that body belonged to Mark Peters. Mark was a friend of my mom. To help my mom out, Mark had offered Glenn a place to stay in his own home. Soon after Glenn moved in, Mark went missing.
The detective looking for him was Glenn's old contact at the Hamilton Police.
At that time, what happened is it came across my desk a report where a Mr. Mark Peters, who lived in the Lindenwall area of our city, had disappeared. We did a lot of newspaper articles and stories about Mr. Peters. There was all types of public service announcements trying to have people come forward and talk to us about any information they had about Mark.
Now, I had two choices. Turn my brother in or cross that line and join you.
I think one of the reasons why I didn't become a serial killer and took a different path is because of the tattoos that I had put on my body. Many years ago, there was an incident in my life where I hurt somebody real bad and I could have killed them. A friend of mine done tattoos. I had him put a 13-inch dragon on my right arm. It represents the great dragon, the serpent from the Old Testament, the devil, evil. I'd had a tear put on my left arm. It's a ball of fire with a demon coming out of it. That's to remind me of what happens when this takes over. And the only outcome once this happens is death. That's a constant reminder every time I look in the mirror that that's exactly what happens every time this gets in control of somebody's life. My brother had a tattoo of his wife, Debbie, on his hand, but all it did was remind him constantly of what he's lost, his kids, his wife, his house. So it was real easy to follow evil. He followed it until that was too powerful, that was all he had. It's very easy to get lost down a road of temptation and evil because they'll suck you in like it's heaven there.
Well, I knew Mark Peters. I liked him. I'd made a conscious decision that I didn't want to walk down this road anymore. So I called Detective Kilgore, and he told me to come in and give him a statement.
Clay had an extensive criminal background, had been in a lot of trouble over the years. I was familiar with him, and I was a little dubious about the information he would provide. But in this particular case, you know, we had no other leads, and we felt it was important that we talk to him. Well, when we walked up to the cabin, some of the officers there with us began a systematic search when they started moving some of the debris in the house, and I remember them seeing a foot stick out of this blue blanket. And at that point in time, I thought, we have found Mr. Peters. Over the years, Clay and Glenn were very close. What I thought was extraordinary about it, his brother led us to the crime scene.
This is the first time in my life where I felt I was doing something that was so right that I actually felt good inside. I came to a realization that I wasn't turning in my brother. I was turning in a serial killer. My brother hadn't lived there for a long time.
But Glenn was now far from Kentucky. He'd gone back to California, and soon he was calling me saying he was hanging out with Hollywood types like Nicole Simpson. In January 1994, an earthquake rocked Los Angeles. About the time the quake hit, my brother Glenn showed up in town.
I was working in Los Angeles at the time. The Northridge earthquake hit earlier that year, and I was working for a company doing earthquake damage.
A few months later, Glenn risked coming back home, even though Ohio police wanted him for questioning.
In 1994, Glenn was living in L.A., and he came back to Hamilton for a visit, and that's why I decided to have a cookout and have my family over. He told me that he'd met this beautiful girl out in California, and her name was Nicole, and said that he'd done work for her in her house, and said that they went out a couple times for drinks. And he said, you know, Sean, my daughter, and her look so much alike. And he said, she's married to this football player. See, he don't know much about sports. And he said, this football player, and he's black. He's famous, but I don't remember his name. He just remembered Nicole.
I'm in my mother's house at this time, and they're already looking for Glenn. The phone rings, and I talked to him, and he asked me, so guess who I'm partying with? Nicole Simpson. Nobody knew who that was. I thought, well, who's that, Bart Simpson's sister? I mean, just joking. He said, no, that's when he told me that was O.J. Simpson's wife. Actually, what he told me, he says, they got money, they're well off, and I'm taking her down.
The body of a woman reported to be Nicole Brown Simpson, ex-wife of football star O.J. Simpson, and a man identified as Ronald Goldman, were found early this morning. Further reports from Los Angeles say the case is being treated as a homicide.
And then I saw pictures of her, and I said, that's who Glenn was telling me about.
Detectives from the Los Angeles Police Department sought and obtained a warrant for the arrest of O.J. Simpson, charging him with the murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Lyle Goldman.
I read how the L.A. District Attorney charged O.J. with the murders. I believed my brother was involved, but who in the hell was going to listen to me? Meanwhile, investigators for the defense found signs that pointed in Glenn's direction.
This is where the murder happened. Straight across the street was Nicole's place. The most significant witness in the whole case was Tom Lang. Lived down the street. He came up to this corner, started to walk across the street, gave a verbal command to his dog, and he spotted Nicole Simpson. He locked eyes, as his words, he locked eyes with her, and then went that way. He also noticed a man in an angry stance right in front of her gate, and he described that person as either white, Asian, or Hispanic, but definitely not African-American. He saw a white Ford F-350 vehicle parked in the street. It would be my wish to find out who it was that was driving that Ford F-350.
Letters and pay stubs show that Glenn was living in Hollywood and working for a company fixing houses and painting across the city. As a painter, Glenn had access to a white pickup truck, like the one seen at Nicole's place. And there were more clues tying Glenn to the murders.
We felt throughout the criminal case and to this day that killer came from the world of Faye Resnick. Faye Resnick was a friend of Nicole's. Faye Resnick was a drug user. a drug abuser, a drug addict that had gone into treatment. She hung with people from a very dark world.
Glenn told me that he had set up Faye Redmond and Nicole Simpson, and they met him at a Van Nuys nightclub. He set them up to rob them. Whether or not he was going to kill them or not, I don't know. He expected just the two girls to be there. But I guess that Ron Goldman showed up.
At the time, I had my suspicions, but I didn't know how he did it or if he really was the killer. It'd be years before Glenn would say what really happened. After the Nicole Simpson murder, Glenn laid low in Los Angeles, California. In September of 1995, he was living in the suburb of Van Nuys. He was using a fake name to cover his past. He'd been hanging out at the local bars trying to meet women when he zeroed in on a 34-year-old mother, Sandra Gallagher.
Sandra Gallagher had gone to this bar because she had won a lottery ticket. She had won $1,200, I think it was, and she went out to celebrate. While there, she was introduced to Glenn Rogers, a mutual friend, and she ended up giving him a ride home. It was horrendous. Sandra Gallagher was found in a truck which had been parked in a parking lot of Convalescent Hospital, and the truck had been set on fire. She had been strangled, and because of the fire, pretty badly incinerated.
After figuring out who the body was, police traced Sandra to the bar she'd been at and found out she'd given Glenn a ride home.
This man is a monster. Think about what happens when you strangle someone. You put your arms around their throat, and you're looking at them, and you're pressing tighter and tighter and tighter, and you're watching that person gasping for breath and gasping for air. And then you finally gave that final snap and they die. That's a very, very up close and personal kind of killing. We tried to locate him and we couldn't locate him. We didn't know where he was.
Glenn had skipped town. He was heading out east, crossing state lines to keep out of reach of the LA police. He hit Jackson, Mississippi a few weeks before Halloween and took up at a carnival that was in town. A few nights later, he met a pretty red-haired named Linda Price.
Linda had two husbands that had died, and then she had a boyfriend that had died. So 3 men in her family had died. And it was like Linda was just looking for, you know, the love of her life.
She was a great sister. We hung out together. She was my baby sister plus my best friend.
We all went to the state fair here in Mississippi. She was walking around the fair and that Glenn was behind her, took a piece of her hair and said, "That's the prettiest red hair I've ever saw." Said, "You're beautiful."
She said, "Look, Marilyn," said, "what do you think about him?" Said, "Ain't he good looking?" I said, "Yeah, Linda, he is nice looking."
Well, you know, to tell Linda that, it was like she was wanting that attention. And it seemed like he did give her that attention that she needed.
She said, "I think I met the right one this time."
3 days later, they went and put in for apartment and put the apartment in Glenn and Linda's name, you know. And they lived there 3 weeks.
They come out to the house and they sit in the backyard and he was saying that he had met Nicole Simpson, that he had actually worked in her apartment. I told Linda, I said, oh, Linda, he's picking at you. He's never met no Nicole Simpson.
I come in from work one day, and I went by the apartment, and he said, you're the bestest mama and grandmother I've ever saw. He said, you are so good. He said, I wish my mother was more like you.
My brother was obsessed with Mom and with women. He could charm ladies and went for women who looked just like Mom. But when he got one, if she stirred up emotions that meant something to him, he'd flip at the slightest hint of being rejected, like a flashback to every rejection he'd felt from our mom in the past.
I seen the mean side of him come out when we went to the bar Halloween night. Me and Linda went to the bathroom and was telling me something happens to me. Said, don't let him get by with it. I said, what do you mean if something happens to you, don't let him get by with it, Linda? Was fixing to tell me something, and he got to banging on that bathroom door. He said, you open this door right now. You open this door. Don't you say a word. You open this door. He was just raging. He said, it's time for us to go. We got to go. He had a mean look on his face the whole time we was driving home. And he got out of the vehicle, and he looked at me, and he said, you will be next. Well, I didn't, know what he meant by that. I had no idea, he was going to, kill my baby sister.
I received a call from our dispatch that a female body had been found in South Jackson. When I got there and was briefed by the patrol officer, I could tell by the way he acted and the way he looked, he was pale and ashen, that he had seen something that was very disturbing. I entered the apartment, which was very dimly lit. I shined my flashlight into the bathroom, and that's when I observed Linda Price in the bathtub. She had been stabbed several times in the chest, and her throat had been cut from ear to ear. A washcloth had been placed on her face. Persons that kill, they don't like to see that death stare back at them, so they place some type of object to cover the face so they don't have to see the death stare.
I found out later Glenn got the hell out of Mississippi and crossed the state line to Louisiana so local police couldn't come after him. Then my sister Sue got a call from Glenn out of the blue. They'd been really close growing up.
It was like early evening when phone rings, like, hello? And it was Glenn. He started talking to me and he scared me, his voice and his laugh. And it sounded like he was possessed, like it wasn't Glenn. I knew it was Glenn, but he was something wrong with him. And then he said, yeah, guess what I'm doing? And I said, what? And I kept hearing this. And I said, what? And he said, I'm smacking these girls on their butt. And I said, Glenn, what are you talking about? And he said, they're dead, and I'm smacking them on their butt. And it freaked me out. And he was laughing, real evil. He said, I'm not going to turn myself in. It's too late. These women don't know who they're messing with. He said that they haven't even scratched the surface. He said 70. He had murdered 70 women, and it would be, he said, you're going to start hearing about it soon.
By the next night, he was at the Bossier City strip of bars and motels, doing what he'd always done, looking for cheap beer and pretty women. He found just that in 37-year-old redhead Andy Sutton and her friend Teresa.
Back then, I was going through a divorce. I was just kind of scared to be on my own, and I ran into Andy and met her in a bar, and she just brought me out of a depression and taught me how to live, and we became really close friends quick. I told her she could come stay at my house, you know, that I slept on the couch anyways. She was family to me. We were at the bar, and this guy went by, and she's like, I like that. His name was Glenn Rogers. Love was a big word, you know, and for her to say she loved Glenn was out of the ordinary for her, because the man was a dime a dozen in her opinion, you know. They were all the same, but this one was different. He stayed that one night, and we took him to the bus station, and he looked at me and like really cold and told me, you take care of her now, you hear? And I was like, I will. Dude, go get on your bus.
Glenn had spun a story about having to buy a car and headed south on a one-way ticket to Tampa, Florida.
A couple days later, I'm contacted by the Tampa, Florida Police Department. They had a female victim down there. Glenn Rogers is a suspect in their murder.
Tina Marie Cribbs was a 33-year-old hotel worker who'd gone through a divorce and was doing the best she could for her 2 kids. 2 nights after Glenn rented a room at the Tampa 8 Motel in Florida, the maid Erica Charleston came in to clean. Erica would later tell the court what she saw.
The bathroom door was closed. I pushed it open. I could see a body in the tub. Just a piece of her head. I could see that it was a dead person.
Tina had been stabbed twice and her body stripped before being placed in the tub. He was going to commit a murder in the motel room. You put the body in the bathtub before you stab it. That way, when the blood runs out of the body with the shower running, it's not all over the sheets, the blankets, the carpeting, the everything. There's no way. Okay, you leave the body in the tub, it drains all night. In the morning, you roll it up, throw it in the trunk, and drive away. And nobody ever knows it happened.
And it's like a forest fire just went out of control, you know. Bodies were showing up, you know, in different states, you know, down south. And my first inclination was, we've got a serial killer on the loose.
Police believe that Rogers killed 71-year-old Mark Peters in Hamilton and then dumped his body in Beattiesville, Kentucky in January of 1994. From there, L.A. police say he murdered a Santa Monica woman in Van Nuys in September of 1994. L.A. investigators say he is a man with a short fuse who is killing for purely psychological reasons.
Now there were local news reports. My brother was wanted for murder in 3 states. But Glenn hadn't been linked to Tina Marie Cribbs' body in Florida just yet. So by the time he got back to Louisiana, not a soul in them Bossier bars knew Glenn was on a killing spree.
She told me my baby's back in town, and I was like, who's your baby? Her baby was Glenn Rogers.
On Wednesday, November 8th, 1995, my brother Glenn met Andy Sutton at a bar in Bossier City, Louisiana. And then they went back to the apartment she shared with her roommate, Teresa.
I remember waking up, and it was 10 o'clock, and I heard this knock at the door, and I asked, who is it? It was Andy's ex-boyfriend that she had been trying to get back with. So I told him just a minute because I figured she was back there with Glenn, and I didn't want that situation to be a drama scene. So I went and knocked on the door, and I got no answer. And I knocked again, and I got no answer. And then I finally just opened the door, and when I went in there, the covers on my waterbed were just tucked like there was something wrapped under the blanket. And I called out her name, and I heard nothing. And then I pushed on the blanket, and still nothing. Everything happened so fast. I pulled the blanket off of her, or off of whatever was under the covers at that time. I pulled the blanket down, and there was a pillow on somebody's head, and it was a person because there was a naked body there, but I didn't know if it's a boy or a girl because it was so flat. Everything was flat. And when I pulled the pillow, I pulled the covers down further, I noticed it was a girl. And I called her name, and no answer, and I pulled the pillow off of her head. And she had this horrible, excruciating look on her face.
Call came in that there had been a deceased person discovered, believed it was a homicide, and directed me to 400 Preston Place Apartments. There was a pile of dirty clothes next to the bed. We went through that pile of dirty clothes, and we found a large butcher knife. Whoever had done this was taking out an awful lot of aggression on this lady's body. Multiple stab wounds. She had defensive wounds on her fingers and her arms. It was just a brutal death, bad. During my interview with Teresa, she had told me that Glenn's truck was at her apartment. I ran Glenn Rogers through NCIC, and it came back a hit.
Police now suspect Glenn Rogers in 6 killings, 1 in Ohio with the body dumped in Kentucky, 2 in California, 1 in Florida, 1 in Mississippi, and 1 in Louisiana.
My brother had killed 3 women in a week, and that was all over the news, all over the country.
Hamilton homicide investigators say they are working with Kentucky State Police and the Los Angeles Police Department in the widening hunt for Glenn Rogers.
Paul Schaefer was a local reporter who took a personal interest in trying to stop the killings. He even went to see my mom to talk her into doing something about Glenn.
On the day I showed up at Edna Rogers' front door, the trajectory and the intensity and the seriousness of this spree and the sense that we all had that this could get worse before it got better, it was very important to reach Edna and at least try and get a message out to him.
Glenn, please, if you hear this, I'm begging you, please give up. Please. I love you very much, and I believe in you. Please. Please give up.
When the murders became big news, Glenn's phone calls to my family started turning nasty.
I was begging him. I said, Glenn, I'll come to you and I'll go with you. And he said, no, they'll shoot me. There's a shoot to kill on me. And I said, well, what do you want me to do? And he said, I don't know if I would ever kill anybody I'm related to, but I'm not sure.
After talking with police officers and detectives and family members and others who had interacted with Glenn in earlier years, it was very clear that he came from a very dysfunctional home. And it was my sense strongly that this was a man that likely wanted to kill his mother and others, but principally her.
I know you don't want to hurt me. You love me too much, and I love him.
She thought he was coming back to kill her and Bob, her boyfriend at the time.
My mom, Edna, has started seeing Bob after our dad, Claude, had been turned into a cripple by a stroke. She'd been nursing my dad back to health for 2 years until his death in 1987, and then moved Bob in, which totally pissed Glenn off.
You know, it might seem surprising to people. Why would he lash out at his mother if his father or others were actually the sources of the abuse? And there's a dynamic in dysfunctional families where the person who should have protected him, not necessarily the abuser, but the person that should have protected him from the abuser, becomes the focus of a great deal of anger and hostility. Glenn was killing his mother repeatedly in these women he killed.
Glenn had told me when I come full circle, he said, I want you to kill me. He wants to pass on the demon when he comes full circle. That's why he was coming back to Hamilton. He was going to come back around and kill anybody. He says, you'll either end up shooting me or I'll shoot you.
He's left a trail of mutilated victims stretching from Los Angeles to Tampa.
The FBI's most wanted, hunted for 5 murders in 5 states. He's on the run, armed and dangerous.
Now it's November 13th, 1995, and my brother Glenn Rogers is the most wanted man in America, with state police and the FBI on his tail.
Last seen leaving the murder scene in Tampa.
Rogers is
Monday.
armed and very dangerous.
And where is Glenn? He's drinking beer down the road from the family cabin. When the police spotted him, the chase was on.
He rolled his window down through a beer can out hitting on the front of my car, on the hood of my car. He then drank another beer and threw it out and hit on the hood of my car. I was afraid that this may be a bit shootout. You know, he may decide this is the way I'm going out.
The police set roadblocks on Highway 52. And federal agents picked me up to be a negotiator if Glenn got trapped and started shooting.
At the time it's happening, I didn't have a lot of time to think about what I was actually doing. I was mainly in shock at what was going on and what they thought that my brother had done and what they had planned to do to him. Come on, let's go! They were hoping to get there in time to prevent any problem that might happen with his arrest. Maybe from being shot and killed.
My brother was still driving the white Ford Festiva he'd stolen from Tina Marie Cribbs after killing her in Florida. He pushed that little car to over 100 miles an hour before troopers ran him off the road outside Waco, Kentucky.
You okay?
Everybody's all right. Everybody's all right. I'm all right. Get up, man. Where have you been hiding, Mr. Rogers? Where have you been, sir? How many people have you killed, Mr. Rogers? Huh? How many people?
You know, looking at this is emotional for me. This was a victim's car, and in that car was pieces of her jewelry and earrings, and there was a lipstick thing, and seeing that car made it very, very, very personal.
Glenn, did you do this?
One-on-one, talk to me in person alone.
Did you do this, Glenn? Did you kill those women, Glenn?
One-on-one alone. At the jail, you interview me.
Did you kill the women?
You hear me?
Did you kill these women, Glenn?
No.
Good and evil exist in this world. And there's some people that are just evil for the sake of being evil, and they like it.
Would you put your brother Glenn in that
I think Glenn would have been a wonderful father, a great human being, but he wasn't given the tools that he needed to become that person. Instead, he was given the tools to become the exact opposite of that.
Police took my brother Glenn to police headquarters in Richmond, Kentucky for questioning.
Well, we took him to the state police post, and he wanted to know what we were there for. And we said that we were there because we had 4 or 5 homicides. He said 4 or 5, maybe 70. He's up to 70, like up to 70 people. These 5 that we knew about, and that he's told us now there's more.
Glenn, why'd you do it, Glenn? Why'd you do it, Glenn? We talked to Sue, Glenn. We talked to Sue. Why'd you do it,
Glenn, your mother called me 5 minutes ago to tell you she loves you. Do you have a message for her?
Love you too.
Glenn, why'd you do it, man?
Get back. Stand back. Stay back. Hey.
Felt like that he probably had killed several, maybe 15 to 20 people. I'm not sure he did the 30 or 40 or 70, but I think he has killed more than what we know, because he killed those 3 or 4 real quick.
This is November the 14th, 1995, jail docket from Madison County, Kentucky. I'd like to call the case of Glenn Edward Rogers. Mr. Rogers?
Yes, sir.
I want to read to you at this time your rights.
When a case like this comes to a climax and a guy like Glenn is arrested, police departments all over the country start pulling out their unsolved cases and looking to see, could he have been linked to this? And this was happening all over.
Glenn was under arrest and the suspect killings. There was Cynthia Berger in California, Jean Ludwig in Michigan, Valerie Brooks in Kentucky, Kayla Mayberry in Louisiana, as well as Carrie Gaskins, Kelly Camargo, and Tommy Wolsifer in Ohio.
My phone rang nonstop in my office from agencies all over the United States and Canada calling, inquiring about our investigation and trying to find some link, you know, maybe to some unsolved murders that they had in their jurisdictions. Basically, if Glenn is connected to a smidgen of these other agencies, there's a lot of bodies that he's responsible for in the United States.
My brother had been moving around the country like a tornado for 15 years. When police took a closer look, they found a pattern. Rare types of killings, bodies left in tubs, frenzied stabbings, and women burnt in cars. We're turning up in places Glenn had passed through, matching him like a glove. Journalists began checking on what my brother might have done.
I started walking the streets of Hamilton, asking people if they knew Glenn Rogers. I asked if there were any other unsolved murders in Hamilton at the time. And by now, this was about 1.5 years after the death of Mark Peters, and soon found that indeed there was. There was an Emerson Skinner, lived 2 doors down from Glenn. Emerson Skinner died brutally, 28 stab wounds. Emerson Skinner was a taxi cab customer of Glenn Rogers. Right away, I started finding bodies. And every time I found a body, there was a trace of Glenn Rogers there.
Right hand there with the yellow.
Police decided to take a closer look at our cabin in Kentucky where Glenn had left Mark Peters' body.
We're searching for any evidence of human remains.
I learned later searchers found human bone and hair in 2 fire pits which could not have belonged to Mark Peters. A sign Glenn had killed at least another couple of people up there. But for all the killings my brother was linked to, only one state could try him at a time. Florida said they had the hard facts to get Glenn convicted and put in the electric chair.
Tampa is the last place Glenn Rogers wants to be, but he lost his 6-month battle today to stay out of a state known for its executions. If prosecutors get their way, Rogers won't leave Florida alive.
From the first time I talked to him in Hillsborough County Jail, I told him his only recourse was to come clean, and at least that way they would know that he was sick to begin with, and he'd have some shot, or maybe life in prison. He has something that he most definitely wants to say, not sure who it's to.
It turned out it would be a criminal profiler called Anthony Mioli who first wrote Glenn in 2009. He was trying to figure out what could turn a man into a killer, and Glenn began sending letters back to him.
Over the past 2.5 years, we've been writing on a regular basis. It took about 6 or 7 months before I received my first initial breakthrough. Rogers had revealed to me a traumatic childhood event that occurred with his father around 1975 or 1976, putting him around 13 years of age. And he went into great detail. It was the 1970s. I was forced to go to work every day at 3:30 p.m. with my dad. He was a janitor for the United Way in Hamilton, Ohio. On many days, he would bring a lady back with him and go to the basement. On one night, he did the same. Earlier, Mom had called about 10 times. I said he was outside working. She called me a liar and cussed me out over and over again. A while later, the lady came up from the basement and says your dad wants to drink from the jug. The phone was ringing nonstop. She grabbed my face cheeks and says, "You be a good boy." I said, "You ain't my mom. You're a damn whore." She said, "Your mother's a stupid bitch," and walked down the hallway. I got really, really pissed, and the damn phone was still ringing. I jumped up, ran down the short hallway, and pushed her from the back down the basement steps. Then, out of fear from hearing my dad yell, I ran and hid in the closet. I heard screaming and yelling, and then all of a sudden it went quiet. It seems like forever. Then my dad calls my name. "You good for mother bastard? You done it now. You killed her. She's laying on the floor." I couldn't tell if it was blood on the floor or if it was wine. He said, "Boy, we gotta clean up this mess." Kept saying, "You can't tell anyone or they will put you in prison and beat you every day." I felt scared, but good also. It was the first conversation I ever had with my dad. In a strange way, it changed things forever. We got her, put her in the trunk of an '88 Oldsmobile. We crossed the Kentucky Bridge into Kentucky. Then Dad pulls over, drags her and carries her to the side of the road. Comes back, shuts the trunk, and gets in the car. He says, "Boy, a snitch is the worst kind of person. When we get home, you don't say a word." But what he didn't know is I wanted to brag to Mom and say, "I killed that bitch for you. She called you a name." But I knew better. After this, Dad didn't take me to work anymore. Didn't even look at me. He said, "Boy, you're no good. I can't take you anywhere." It wasn't any time before I stopped being scared. I hated everyone in our home. I spent the next few years taking it out on other people. If someone didn't like me, I didn't care. I just hated them more. To this day, I don't know if I killed her when she fell down the stairs or if he did, but I was made to believe I did it. Your friend, Glenn Rogers.
And nothing ever happened about it. It's not that hard to get away with. You dig a hole far enough out and deep enough, no one ever knows.
This murder was Glenn's first big confession to the criminal profiler. Now Glenn was ready to come clean on another crime, the murder of Nicole Brown Simpson. Back in 1994, my brother Glenn told me he'd met Nicole Simpson, that she was rich, and that he was going to take her down. Just a few days later, a neighbor found the bodies of Ron Goldman and Nicole outside her Brentwood home. While I was thinking Glenn had done it, L.A. prosecutors charged O.J. with the crime. The trial began January 24th, 1995, with O.J. Simpson charged with killing his ex-wife and her 25-year-old friend, Ron Goldman. Prosecutors used a range of graphic devices to prove their case.
The animation showed the government's theory that O.J. Simpson came to Bundy, went through the front gate, killed Nicole, then struggled and killed Ron Goldman, and then left out the back gate.
But the prosecution changed their claim on how the victims had been attacked when new evidence was laid out by the coroner.
Dr. Lakshmanan said Nicole's head was slashed. She was banged against the wall and knocked unconscious. At that point, the prosecutor revealed a new theory. The murderer left Nicole and killed Ron Goldman, then came back for what is described as the coup de grace.
Well, when we first saw it, it presented O.J. Simpson as the murderer, sole murderer, in this alcove. It just didn't fit. By that time, we'd come up with the fact that there had to be more than one person.
After 8 months of evidence and 3 hours of deliberation, the trial of the century ended October 3rd, 1995.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 187A, a felony upon Nicole Brown Simpson.
6 weeks after O.J. was found not guilty, the law caught up with Glenn. It wasn't long before my brother was dropping hints about his past crimes.
First time I heard about Nicole Simpson and Ron Goldman's murder, I was in my office in Van Nuys and really thought nothing more about it. One day I did receive some letters from a prison inmate indicating that Glenn Rogers had written to him that he had met Nicole Brown Simpson, and the inference was, and you know what else? We forwarded it immediately to the O.J. Simpson prosecutors.
Authorities ignored clues leading to my brother, and it would be years before Glenn came back to that story. Glenn wasn't going to drop hints and letters this time. My brother had learned a new trick during his years on death row: how to paint.
These are pictures that Glenn Rogers actually drew in his cell at various times during our correspondence.
Glenn was even able to paint the demons he believes have lived inside him all his life.
Glenn had explained to me the meaning of this piece. Basically, what you see here is two bottomless abysses, and this is the evil within him looking into the deep abyss and seeing two huge tunnels leading down into hell.
At first, Glenn drew what took over his mind when crimes occurred. Then my brother started drawing hints about the blood he had shed.
At this stage of our relationship, Glenn starts to include clues and/or names and/or places that he knows I will find in a certain amount of time.
In June 2011, Glenn sent the criminal profiler a clue that linked him to the murders of Nicole Simpson and Ron Goldman.
Here you see R-O-N And on this tombstone, used the letters Nicole. His admission of his involvement in the Ronald Goldman and Nicole Brown Simpson murders.
After getting many letters and paintings, the criminal profiler wanted to confront my brother in person to get the evidence he needed. He paid a visit to Florida's Union Correctional Institution. Finally, years after the murder, Glenn was ready to tell his side of the story.
Department of Corrections puts out what they called cold case homicide cards. We would grab different games and talk for 6 hours a visit. After I asked him that he had not sent me any specific information regarding his involvement in the O.J. Simpson case, he said, I had, you just didn't pay attention to the clues. I challenged Glenn to prove that he had actually committed the murders, that only the killer would know what the actual murder weapon looked like. And so Glenn drew the specific weapon.
Now, Glenn added a twist that he never told me. A husband's anger over a high-dollar gift that had been kept by his ex-wife was behind it all. Glenn told the criminal profiler he was paid to steal back Nicole's diamonds.
Can you show me a set of earrings that would cost approximately $20,000 about 20 years ago? O.J. Simpson allegedly hired Glenn Rogers to get into the house of Nicole Brown Simpson and get a pair of earrings. Essentially, his belief was that they were worth $20,000. Glenn told me that O.J.'s instructions were that you may have to kill the bitch. Those were his exact words. Glenn Rogers explained to me that he had parked his white pickup truck, a Ford pickup truck, on a side street right by the side of the condo. He explained that O.J. knew of a spare set of keys in the rear of the condo. The idea was that actually the murder would take place inside the home. Once Glenn got the keys, he then crouched down just past the front of the gate. At that moment is when Ronald Goldman walks through the front gate. Glenn Rogers realized that Ronald Goldman suddenly became an obstacle that needed to be dealt with. He struck him with a large knife, incapacitating him, and threw him against the tree. It was not something that I had expected Rogers to say. He said that upon her entering into the fray, he stabbed Nicole Brown Simpson once, and she fainted. He charged Goldman and pushing him against the tree where he later was found deceased. He said that he pulled her hair back to expose her neck and pulled the knife once to sever her neck to kill her instantly.
OJ, anything you can tell us?
OJ didn't want to, quote, get his hands dirty, per se, in the crimes. He was essentially going to check on Glenn's work.
If Glenn's story was true, there had to be something at the crime scene to show he'd been there. And sure enough, evidence came out in the Simpson trial that two men were there. Shoe prints spelled out a story in blood.
And the Lorenzo.
FBI agent William Bodziak went halfway around the world to find these expensive Italian shoes he said are similar to the ones that could have been worn by O.J. Simpson to commit the murders. Bodziak examined the bloody footprints found on the walkway outside Nicole Brown Simpson's condo. They matched the soles on the exclusive Bruno Malley shoes, he said, and the size of Simpson's tennis shoes are a perfect fit.
But the shoe prints that looked like OJ's weren't the only ones there.
It's possible to identify here a design that resembles a shoe.
Yes.
Nationally known forensic scientist Henry Lee identified a second set of shoe prints, what could be a mystery murderer.
By the time O.J. had gotten there, 2 people had bled significantly onto the sidewalk.
If O.J. Simpson told me I did it, I would want to know how. You got to explain to me how you did this in less than 6 minutes and got rid of the weapon, the clothes, the bloody clothes. How did you do this? Impossible.
I'm absolutely certain that my brother Glenn killed Nicole Simpson and Ron Goldman.
I know my brother did it because I've seen proof that he was there.
Somber members of the Brown family attended a candlelight vigil marking the first anniversary of the death of Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend Ron Goldman on June 12, 1994. Family members wore angel pins in memory of Nicole, who had collected angel jewelry before her death.
I remember the pin. Mom said Glenn sent it to her. And when she went to trial, he wanted her to wear it.
In 2010, I'd got another letter from Glenn, and this is what it says.
At my trial,
Mom has on that black vest top, and pinned to it is a gold angel with a diamond in its hand. I sent that to Mom the day after the situation in Brentwood. It's something everyone missed. I believe that that angel pin is absolute proof that Glenn killed Nicole Simpson and Ron Goldman. The same pendant taken off her body. The same pendant that my mom wore on her vest into the courtroom in Hillsborough County Jail.
"18 months after he was captured, a Florida judge sentenced Glenn to death for killing Tina Marie Cribbs in the Tampa 8 motel.
May God have mercy on your soul.
On July 16, 1999, California sentenced Glenn for the murder of Sandra Gallagher, who was found in her burnt-out truck.
Now, this man not only attacked our daughter, he brutalized her, he raped her, he set her on fire, killed her. This man does not deserve to live.
After that last trial, my brother became one of the few men in America sentenced to face 2 separate executioners.
And because of that, other families like those of Linda Price in Mississippi could never get their day in court. Just about every other state where Glenn was suspected quietly dropped their investigations.
I feel like my involvement in the Glenn Rogers cases, whatever minute or big they may be, I feel like by him being executed that I contributed to the point that he's about to be at. And I've got great relief knowing that.
They took a part of my life, my baby sister, and I had a dream about her, actually, and right after, probably a couple of years after, you know, it happened, and she was laying on my floor, and she was telling me, don't let him get away with it. Said, you make sure he gets justice, because you know he killed me. In my heart now, I believe he will, you know, get his judgment.
It's been 15 years since a judge sentenced Glenn to die. He's run out of appeals and could be executed any day now.
He has said he just wants me there to witness. And I'm not going to do that. I can't live with that. I can't watch somebody die, especially my brother.
On the day that the execution does happen, and I'm sure that it will, I'd like to be right there. I don't think anybody else will. I want somebody to be there that he knows is there for the right reason.
So what is the right reason?
To let him know that I understand. It could have been me. Yeah, I'm about done.
This is the Rogers Family Cemetery in Lee County, Kentucky. Our family's been buried here since 1840. My brother Glenn is on death row, and this is where he wants to be buried. Well, Glenn likes to get a final ha-ha, a final gotcha in on anything. And what would be the best gotcha ha-ha to be buried next to his murder victims that you don't even know he did. The dirt is all loose. So's the grave next to it. Glenn told me the best way to get rid of a body is find a fresh dug grave. Move the dirt over, put the body down in it, cover the dirt back up, lay the sod back down. Nobody never know it's there. If there are people up here, we need to know. I got a message, Glenn. Time to come clean. It's getting too close. It's been too long. You know, come clean, bring closure to everybody, and show everybody that you're not the animal that they think you are. Okay? Just do that for me.